The flames of conflict. In the early dawn of February 2022, the world watched as an age-old conflict ignited into full-scale war. Russia, a vast and powerful nation, and Ukraine, a country striving to forge its own path, were plunged into a battle that would reshape the lives of millions. This is the story of those caught in the crossfire, a tale of survival, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. The calm before the storm. In the quiet village of Novry-Hrivka, nestled near the border between Russia and Ukraine, life moved at a peaceful pace. The villagers, a tight-knit community, were farmers, teachers, and craftsmen, living off the fertile land that had sustained generations before them. The first strike. It was a cold morning, when the first signs of war became impossible to ignore. The distant rumble of artillery fire echoed through the fields, and the sky, once blue and endless, was marred by the streaks of fighter jets. Anastasia watched in horror as a plume of smoke rose from the direction of the town center. The village, like many others along the border, was caught unprepared. Tanks rolled through the fields where sunflowers once bloomed, and soldiers, both Russian and Ukrainian, took up positions in the streets. The peace that had defined Novry-Hrivka was shattered in an instant. For Anastasia, there was no time to dwell on the chaos. The school where she taught was transformed into a makeshift hospital, and she found herself tending to the wounded, soldiers and civilians alike. The lines between enemy and ally blurred as the common struggle for survival took precedence. How to set traps, and how to shoot. The bond between them grew, forged in the crucible of war. They were not lovers, but their connection ran deep, a shared understanding of the horrors they had seen, and the grim determination to fight for their home. The siege of Mariupol. The war spread like wildfire, and soon, the resistance in Novry-Hrivka was drawn into the larger conflict. Mariupol, a key port city on the Sea of Azov, became a focal point of the war. The Russian forces, seeking to secure a strategic corridor to Crimea, laid siege to the city. Anastasia and Ivan were among those who volunteered to join the defenders of Mariupol. The city, once vibrant and full of life, was now a war zone. Buildings lay in ruins, and the streets were filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions. The Ukrainian forces, though outnumbered, fought with everything they had. The defenders were a mix of regular soldiers, volunteers, and civilians like Anastasia and Ivan, all united by a common goal, to hold the city at all costs. For weeks, they fought a brutal, close-quarters battle. The siege was relentless, with constant bombardments from land, sea, and air. Supplies ran low, and the situation grew increasingly desperate. Yet, the defenders held on, driven by the knowledge that the fall of Mariupol would be a devastating blow to Ukraine's efforts. The cost of war. As the siege dragged on, the toll on both sides became unbearable. The city was in ruins, and the death toll climbed into the thousands. Anastasia witnessed horrors that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Children torn from their families, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, and the unrelenting grief of those who had lost everything. But amid the despair, there were moments of hope. Acts of kindness and solidarity became lifelines for the beleaguered defenders. Anastasia and Ivan found solace in each other's company, sharing stories of their lives before the war, of the dreams they still held on to, however faint. One night, during a lull in the fighting, Ivan revealed a secret. He had been a father once, before the war took everything from him. His wife and daughter had been killed in an airstrike, and every day since, he had fought not just for his country, but for their memory. Anastasia listened in silence, her heart breaking for the man who had lost so much. In that moment, Anastasia made a vow. If they survived this war, she would ensure that Ivan's story, and the stories of all those who had suffered, would not be forgotten. The world needed to know the truth, not just of the battles and the politics, but of the human cost of the conflict. The turning point. The siege of Mariupol reached its climax as the Ukrainian forces launched a daring counteroffensive. Mariupol was saved, but the cost had been immense. The aftermath. The war dragged on for months, with no clear victor in sight. But the tide was slowly turning in Ukraine's favor. International support grew, and the Ukrainian forces, bolstered by new supplies and reinforcements, began to reclaim lost territory. Anastasia, now a seasoned fighter, continued to play her part in the resistance. But the war had changed her. She was no longer the idealistic school teacher who had once dreamed of a peaceful life. She had seen too much, lost too much. When the fighting finally subsided, and a fragile ceasefire was declared, Anastasia returned to Novry-Hrivka. The village was unrecognizable, scarred by the war, but still standing. The survivors, weary and battered, began the slow process of rebuilding. It was a last-ditch effort to break the Russian lines and relieve the city. Anastasia and Ivan were part of the team tasked with a critical mission to take out a Russian artillery position that had been hammering the city day and night. The mission was dangerous, but it was their only hope. Under the cover of darkness, they moved through the ruins, avoiding patrols and booby traps. When they reached the enemy position, a fierce firefight erupted. Bullets whizzed past, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. In the chaos, Ivan was hit. Anastasia rushed to his side, but it was too late. With his last breath, Ivan pressed a blood-stained letter into her hand. A letter he had written to his daughter. A letter that had never been sent. He died in her arms, a look of peace finally settling on his face. Grief-stricken but determined, Anastasia completed the mission. The artillery was destroyed, and the Ukrainian forces were able to push back the Russian lines. Anastasia kept her promise to Ivan. She took the letter he had given her and delivered it to his family, who had fled to a refugee camp in Poland. They wept as they read his final words, but they were grateful to know that he had fought bravely and died with honor. The new dawn. Years passed, and Ukraine began to heal from the wounds of war. The scars would never fully fade, but the country emerged stronger, more united. The war had shown the world the resilience and courage of the Ukrainian people. Anastasia, too, found a new purpose. She became a writer, chronicling the stories of the war, the heroes and the victims, the battles and the losses, the love and the sacrifice. Her books became bestsellers, translated into multiple languages, and her voice became a powerful advocate for peace. But she never forgot the people of Novry-Hrivka, the village that had shaped her, and the friends she had lost. Every year, on the anniversary of Ivan's death, she returned to the place where he had fallen, laying flowers on the unmarked grave that served as a memorial to all those who had given their lives for their country. In the end, Anastasia found peace not in the absence of conflict, but in the knowledge that she had fought for something greater than herself. The war had taken much from her, but it had also given her a sense of purpose, a reason to keep living. And as she looked out over the fields of sunflowers that had once been trampled by tanks, she knew that the spirit of Ukraine, resilient, defiant, and unbroken, would live on, in her stories, and in the hearts of all those who had fought for their homeland. This is not just a story of war, it is a story of humanity, of the choices we make in the face of unimaginable adversity. In the end, the true victory is not in the battles won or lost, but in the strength of the human spirit to endure, to hope, and to rebuild.